War. War never changes.
You some kind of war junkie?
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
Welcome to the War 102 podcast, where we explore the doctrine, theory, philosophy, and history of warfare. I'm your guide, Paul Darling, and I want to share what I learned in nearly 30 years in uniform. So let's get to learning about the most influential activity in human history, war. Welcome to episode 102, the generals of World War II. Now, I'm not going to list all of them. That'd be very difficult, but I'm going to hit some of the big names, the five-star generals. I'm not going to discuss the admirals simply because that is magic stuff that I don't really understand particularly well. We'll assume we won the war, that the five-star admirals earned the ranks and did great. I'm going to focus on more of what I know. This is a request. I got a lot of answers back, but not a lot. I got a couple. I'll take them of what you want to hear. I've also got a lot of feedback that the more free-flowing discussion format was appreciated over the scripted narratives that I had been leaning on as I discussed forgotten generals that I just couldn't free script those ones. I had to write it down and go through it. So with that, let's talk about the five-star generals of World War II. You had General Marshall, who served as the Chief of Staff of the Army, the only non-West Pointer, and a graduate of VMI. You had General Eisenhower, pretty famous guy. You had General Bradley. You had Hap Arnold, the Army Air Corps, then Army Air Force. And then, of course, you had MacArthur. I'm going to include one more general in the discussion, and that's going to be Patton, simply because he's quite famous for a number of reasons, most of them good. The movie Patton has cemented his place in American culture. It's a fantastic movie. If you haven't seen it, it's worth it. It's also a very flawed movie, not least of which because the movie wasn't about Patton. It was about Bradley. The movie was based on Bradley's book. Bradley served as a senior consultant, and by the time the movie was made, Patton was long dead. So there's a hagiography that went on with some of these generals, particularly Marshall, Eisenhower, and Bradley, and the desire to tear down MacArthur, Patton, and Hap Arnold is largely forgotten. So I'm going to go over a little bit of them. Now, the thing to remember about three of them, Marshall, Eisenhower, and Bradley, is they were infantrymen with no direct combat leadership experience from World War I. And I think this really set a tone in how they thought about the war. General Marshall did deploy. He served as Chief of Staff to General Pershing, who took a liking to him. And Pershing ended up becoming his mentor. Pershing and MacArthur started off strong. Both were legends within the military. Blackjack Pershing, and it wasn't blackjack, by the way. It used a word which can no longer be stated in polite company that starts with a letter that I hesitate to even say, because in order to get advanced promotion to colonel, he agreed to command a black regiment, a cavalry regiment. So he got the not so nice moniker of something else, Jack, and which was cleaned up to Blackjack Pershing, which is not a bad nickname. He was first captain of his West Point class, as was MacArthur. First captain now means the highest ranking cadet that's promoted. It doesn't necessarily mean first in their class. Back in the day, it meant he was first in the class. MacArthur, it should be noted, was the son of a Medal of Honor winner from the Civil War, Arthur MacArthur. And when he went to West Point, he took a ton of grief because of the lineage from his family. The hazing back in the day was pretty rough. In fact, MacArthur, when he was the superintendent, the highest ranking officer at West Point, did a lot to curb the excesses of the abuse that went on to the plebes, much of it from his own experience. I will relay a story that while MacArthur got the crap hazed out of him, when there was a congressional investigation into abuse of first-class cadets, MacArthur refused to narc. He saw the abuses as part of the initiation, and while he didn't think they were necessary and thought they were excessive, he didn't complain. He didn't name names. He stayed out of it, much to his credit. I will also state that I read MacArthur's biography before I went to West Point, and in my company, there was also an investigation into abuse of the fourth fourth classmen, the plebes. And due to my failings as a cadet, which I'm all too free to admit, I was not a very good cadet. I suffered more than my share of abuse. But I remember MacArthur's example, and I remember what he went through in reading his book. By the way, the biography was American Caesar by Manchester. Fantastic book. Manchester's just a fantastic biographer, first and foremost. Any opportunity to read what he has written is worth it. He's very, very good at what he does. He's very fair to his subjects. So American Caesar, recommended if you want to know more about MacArthur and any biography. Manchester did a fantastic one on Winston Churchill, multi-volume edition, in fact. So anyways, I remembered Manchester, and when it came up, and they're like, tell me if, what happened and who did what, and do you think it was abuse? I didn't say nothing. I was just like, nope. Look, I was a messed up cadet. These guys tried to correct me in the best manner they could. I saw nothing excessive. Now, was I keeping in the spirit of duty, honor, country, and cadet will not lie, cheat, or steal, nor tolerate those who do? Was I lying? Kind of. Yeah, I thought what I suffered was a little excessive, but I figured if MacArthur could take what he did, I could take it too. So anyways, take that for what it's worth. Moving on. The reason I bring this up is Pershing saw MacArthur as a protege, former, first captains, destined to lead, very gifted leaders, both of them. MacArthur broke from Pershing during World War I especially, and then certainly after the war. In fact, they were chasing after the same woman, and MacArthur won, much to the older Pershing's chagrin. There was no love lost. So there was a natural conflict between General Marshall and MacArthur based upon their conflicting relationships with General Pershing. That's something to keep in mind. So while Marshall deployed to World War I, he always served in a staff position. He did receive a Silver Star for his service in World War I, but it was given 2 years later in 1920, well after the war, and he received that while he was serving as Chief of Staff still to General Pershing. Pershing realized that Marshall needed some combat leadership chops within his resume to forward his career better in the Army. And so based upon how that award was given, so it was because he did reconnaissance before a battle and writing the plan. It's a very sketchy award. I don't think it's deserved. I think it's political, much like Lyndon Baines Johnson's Silver Star was absolutely political, and MacArthur gave that. Politics and favoritism goes into every award. There's no award, to include the Purple Heart and the Medal of Honor, that has not been bastardized or politicized to a certain degree. And that's unfortunate, but it's reality. So it's important that when you see awards, you realize that what is written in the narrative is almost unquestionably embellished, and that different circumstances can drive the award. Often, high-ranking awards are there to hide a mistake that was made. If you look at Lone Survivor, the story with Marcus Luttrell et al., he had 4 Navy SEALs, 1 Medal of Honor, 3 Navy Crosses, and they didn't kill a single enemy, despite what the book and the movie shows. It was an absolute failure at every level, and yet they rained awards on it, not because of any demonstrable particular valor that was demonstrated. 3 people died, and the 1 person who lived ran away as soon as the first bullets were fired. No one knows what happened on that hill, but they had to somehow gloss over the fact that 4 Navy SEALs were wiped out by about 10 actual Taliban. It's not to denigrate anyone who died in combat. At the end of the day, the only truly unquestionable recognition of valor is a KIA. If you died, that is the ultimate test. It is unquestionable that you gave full measure to your country. But I mean, I've even seen BS Purple Hearts. It's unfortunate, and I digress. I'm not trying to tear down Marshall. I'm just saying, during World War I, he did not see direct combat. Eisenhower and Bradley did not deploy at all, and not because they avoided it. Both, every officer in the United States Army was volunteering to go to World War I, but they were both junior, class of 1915. So, only 2 to 3 years, and they had training assignments. General Patton famously deployed as part of the Armor Corps. He was a cavalryman, as was Pershing, Marshall Eisenhower Bradley were infantry, and Pershing was a cavalryman as well. I mentioned that. And then MacArthur started off as an engineer, and it wasn't until he made 06, full colonel, that he went over to infantry because his father was an infantryman, part of the Wisconsin infantry regiments during the Civil War. So he changed his branch, partly to honor his father, but mostly because he realized that engineers are a technical branch, infantry is a leadership branch, and he wanted more than just being an 06 in the Corps of Engineers, and infantry was the route to that. Also, another officer who did that was Westmoreland, who commanded all U.S. forces in Vietnam. He started off as a field artilleryman who became an aviator. When the Air Force was created, he decided to stay as an Army officer, and then in the Korean War, he changed from field artillery to infantry, so he could command a infantry regiment during the Korean War, and then carried that forward to four stars in Vietnam. Another side note there. Patton famously won a Distinguished Service Cross during an armor assault where he recklessly advanced. He was the lead tank of the entire attack, if I remember correctly. He lobbied hard for that award. Patton was, I won't say vainglorious, but it wouldn't be inaccurate if someone did. I'm a fan of Patton. I hate to denigrate the man, but the fact is he was brave, and he wanted everyone to know that he was brave. MacArthur was absolutely reckless, and I don't think it was valorous in so much as it was arrogance. So early in his career, he was on the Pancho Villa expedition with Patton, and MacArthur got into a firefight with some of the rebels, and a bullet went through his hat. The story goes, going back to William Manchester, that an old salty NCO told MacArthur as a lieutenant, and now that I'm thinking about the timelines, it may have been the Philippines insurrection. Anyways, I digress. As a lieutenant, MacArthur got into a fight, bullet went through his hat, and the sergeant said, "Listen, you're begging the lieutenant's pardon, but your life from here on out is going to be pure velvet." MacArthur thought it was impossible for him to die. Patton was aware of his mortality and feared it, and constantly had to demonstrate his bravery. MacArthur just thought nothing could happen to him. So here's an example of different ways of manifesting this. Patton, as a four-star general, famously, had his two pistols, a Model 27, 357, and then an old Colt 45 single-action Army issue revolver. MacArthur went unarmed. Even during World War I, he would lead, even though he was the chief of staff, and at one point the division commander temporarily, assistant division commander of the 42nd Infantry, the Rainbow Division. And he would lead, he would go over with the first waves, and he would carry nothing but a stick and a scarf. He saw no reason to be armed, and he saw no reason to take any risks, take any precautions for his own safety. And he was constantly reminded by Pershing, ordered not to do it, and he did it anyways. And so this was another reason that it created a bit of conflict. He was absolutely reckless. So what did that mean? Well, one, MacArthur was nominated twice for the Medal of Honor before he was nominated and awarded the third time during World War II. During World War I, he won 7 Silver Stars. And if I remember correctly, 2 Distinguished Service Crosses. His bravery, it's funny that he has this moniker of Dugout Doug, that he's some kind of coward, which was the Marine Corps trying to tear him down because he was stealing the limelight from the Marines. You say what you want to about MacArthur, he's an egomaniac, unquestionably, but a coward he was not. The man was, and again, it's not that he was particularly brave. He just thought he couldn't die. And he was, even during Corregidor, when they were calling him Dugout Doug, during the middle of attacks, he would go out and walk from position to position and completely exposed to enemy fire. That's why he got his Medal of Honor. He was reckless with his life. So while Patton had to be armed and show that he was a fighter, MacArthur just did it as a course of action because he was untouchable. So let's bring that forward. We're gonna move on forward and why this background is all relevant. One of the listeners asked, was Patton lucky? And no, Patton was not lucky.
Patton was very, very good at what he did. And this goes into the mentality. Marshall, Eisenhower, and Bradley never, ever figured out the realities of modern armored conflict. Now, I'll remove Marshall because as chief of staff, one, he never left Washington, D.C. He was a political creature. When he was selected by Roosevelt to be the chief of staff, he bypassed over half of the officers who outranked him. And the reason is Marshall, based upon the advice and guidance of Pershing, was an open Democrat as an officer. He openly supported Roosevelt, campaigned for him. In fact, he commanded during peacetime more civilian conservation corps units than he did actual units in uniform of military units. He was a political creature, which is why Roosevelt selected him. And he wanted someone loyal. And, you know, there's a lot of thing in the news now that Pete Hegseth, the Sec War, is firing a lot of general officers. He's not firing a lot of general officers. Of the 43 general officers, it's crazy to think the Army only had 43 general officers in 1939, but they did. Marshall fired 75% of them. Cleaned house. He left 11 general officers out of 40-something that were initially there. So, you know, cleaning house when the military is not going in the direction you want, nothing new. And Marshall's lauded for it. I mean, there's hagiographies about, oh, what an blah, blah, blah. It is hagiography. Marshall's a very capable officer, is very intelligent in his own way. He was militarily intelligent. He went to VMI because he couldn't get into West Point, and his grades were such that he didn't even get a degree. He received a diploma of completion, but he didn't get a degree from VMI because his grades weren't high enough, and he didn't get a commission in the Army. But as a political creature, he went to Washington, D.C. and personally lobbied the President of the United States at the time to get him a commission. So I admire his drive to become an officer. And look, as a political creature, Marshall was just as good as Eisenhower. And the reason Eisenhower became president was, frankly, Marshall was too old. By the time Truman was no longer president in 1952, Marshall was in his 70s. He served a long career, as was MacArthur. They were roughly peers. As infantrymen, Marshall, Eisenhower, and Bradley understood intuitively that the infantry wins the battles. But in modern mechanized warfare, Patton understood, and the Germans understood, and probably Pershing would have understood, that if you've learned anything from my podcast, is it is the pursuit of a broken enemy that wins a war, that defeats the army in the Clausewitzian sense. And Napoleon said, listen, a retreat is a maneuver, but a pursuit of a routed enemy is not a maneuver. That is the crumbling apart. And so I criticize Eisenhower and Bradley especially, and Marshall for supporting them, that every time they would win a battle, and we can lump Montgomery in there, also an infantryman, they would stop and regroup and have everyone come up. And that was the antithesis of what modern mechanized warfare was. And Patton understood that. And you see this criticism in the movie Patton that Bradley lays upon him, that he's so aggressive, he keeps fighting and moving forward. And doesn't he think about the troops? Well, he is thinking about the troops because you want to end a war. Fighting a battle against an army in the defense is the worst. And so the broad front advance that they constantly talked about, stopping to let Montgomery finally catch up, this slow plodding pace, terrified of taking any risk. That's not how the Germans fought. It's not how Patton fought. And it's not how we fight now. We still admire Eisenhower and Bradley, perhaps too much, but tactically and operationally, they were behind the times at best and incompetent at worst. The war in the Western Front should have been over within months after D-Day. After Cobra, the Germans were broken and the bulk of their forces were on the Eastern Front fighting the Russians. Patton, if properly supported as the exploiting force after Operation Cobra, as the breakout from Normandy beachhead, could have been in Berlin in a month or two if he had been resourced. But it was the political desire of Eisenhower to keep Churchill happy And it was also the nervousness of Bradley not understanding that you have to take risks with an exploding force and abandon the flanks to a certain degree to chase the broken enemy. They just didn't get it. And so to the question of the reader who asked, was Patton lucky? No, Patton was not lucky. Patton was very good. To people who are criticizing the Sec War now for firing generals, that's fine. Criticize them, but realize that as far as cleaning house, that is a thing that happens. And if you have to admire Marshall, well, then you can't criticize the Sec War simply for firing generals. And I'll say that the current General Officer Corps lost a 20-year war to illiterate goat herders. They don't have a record of success that they're leaning upon. And the continued erosion of the trust of the military General Officer Corps is an indictment upon the General Officer Corps. We need change. We need fundamental change. And I don't see any generals coming out asking for fundamental change. I see generals coming out and asking for more money to do the exact same. And Hegseth, as a National Guard infantry part-timer, I have a lot of respect for that. I come from a similar background in the second half of my career. He saw the callous disregard and frankly incompetence while he was deployed in combat, leading troops at a captain, lieutenant level. He saw it and it pissed him off, and he wrote a book and it drove him. And it's why he's the Sec War. It's why Trump brought him into that position. And just like Roosevelt brought Marshall in and Marshall cleaned house, Hegseth's doing the same thing. And like it or dislike it, but the GOs have not earned the right to use appeal to authority as a criticism against the Sec War's actions. All right, this went a bit long. I just want to talk a little bit about what's going on. You're going to see some more scripted stuff, but you're going to see much more of this kind of free-flowing. I hope you don't mind it, and I'll talk to you next week. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening today. If you want to help the show, please share today's episode on any social media sites you can. Check out the War 102 Buzzsprout website for more information and to send me a message. And, of course, my thanks to the subscribers who help keep the show going. Hope you all join me next week. See you soon.